Hey guys, Nike here. Welcome to my updated warrior build guide for PvE raids, dungeons, and fractals. General overview, warrior didn't get many changes directly in the last balance patch, but it's been almost 7 months since I updated this guide, and the meta has drifted in a couple different directions than my previous guide, and I thought I'd go over the changes. First, the Signet of Inspiration nerf hurt might stacking, as any might the warrior failed to generate would be made up by the Mesmer or Revenant in the group. The change has resulted in a greater emphasis on warriors' might stacking, and in many cases requires sacrificing a bit more personal DPS to achieve it. Secondly, in the last 6 months or so since the Dps Golem was introduced, people's understanding of rotations and class minutiae has become hyper-refined. Instead of one-size-fits-all builds and rotations, people have refined several variants to every class that are dedicated to particular circumstances, or even based on differing party compositions. Discussing every possible variant within any guide or video would be a significant amount of effort, and most likely more than it's worth for most viewers, but I will discuss the major options in this build and explain when I suggest to utilize them. So with this introduction out of the way, let's discuss the warrior's current role in endgame PvE. A warrior's role in PvE raids, dungeon, or fractals is offensive buffs with banners, might, and empowered allies. With that said, there are two current warrior builds that I would recommend. The Phalanx Strength Power Warrior, which is a build that's been part of the meta for a very long time and is instantly recognizable to almost every veteran player. The second build is the Condi Phalanx Strength build, which is designed for encounters where condition damage is either required or the mechanics are such that the melee uptime on a boss is low enough to make the range nature of the DPS optimal. Additionally, the DPS rotation of Con DPS is much easier to maximize in practice compared to power. Therefore, in many encounters, Con DPS will have significantly higher DPS than the power version, simply because you'll be able to stick to an optimal rotation far easier. So let's start with the gear for the Power Warrior. For the Phalanx Strength Power Warrior, I recommend that your rune set be Superior Rune of the Scholar. Along with the food Golden Fried Dumplings, a Scholar build will maximize personal DPS, as well as provide the required might that groups expect. I do want to mention that Strength runes, however, are also viable. Using Strength runes along with DPS foods such as Truffle Steaks is less than a 1% DPS loss compared to Scholar with Dumplings, so long as you assume a reasonable Scholar uptime of about 75%. Additionally, for groups with only one Power Warrior who is expected to might stack a subgroup of up to 7 other players, I would recommend Strength Runes and Golden Dumplings for maximum might stacking capabilities. Regardless of your choice, the best in slot utility consumables are always bountiful sharpening stones. For weapons, I recommend a greatsword with Sigil of Accuracy and Sigil of Force. On swap, I recommend a mace and shield with Sigil of Accuracy and Sigil of Strength. In dungeons or fractals, you often want a Warhorn on swap between fights for faster movement for your team. Accuracy Sigil with Signet of Might is slightly lower DPS versus single targets than Air Sigil and Signet of Fury. But in any encounter with adds to cleave, the Accuracy build will pull ahead. The primary advantage of the Air Sigil build in single target is not only the damage from the proc, but the free adrenaline from the damage from the proc that allows you to sometimes get an extra arc divider in per berserk phase. However, in a fight with cleaving, the extra adrenaline is irrelevant because the extra adrenaline you'll get for cleaving will more than give you enough to berserk on cooldown. Additionally, the damage from the Air Sigil is only single target, which is significantly less impactful when hitting multiple targets at once. As a result, many of the raid encounters and fractals, there is no good reason to run an Air Sigil Signet of Fury build unless you plan on activating your Signet of Fury for adrenaline. For gear stats and infusion, there is no single perfect mix. An optimal mix is achieved by reaching 100% crit chance, including any precision from your food, when fully buffed without going over. How will you know you've got the right mix? If you're unbuffed and your hero panel says 63.76% crit chance, you will be, with banners, spotter, and fury, exactly at 99.0% crit chance on your hero panel, which is actually equal to 100% in game. You can, again, arrive at this exact number many different ways, and they are all basically equal in terms of stats and DPS. The important thing to consider is if you will be using golden dumplings or truffle steak, as the required precision numbers from gear and infusions will differ depending on the food that you plan to use in the build. Traits for the Power Warrior. We're going to take Strength, Tactics, and Berserker. In Strength, we're going to take Restorative Strength, Forceful Greatsword, and Berserker's Power. Forceful Greatsword and Berserker's Power are a very big DPS increase for the Warrior. Without them, the Warrior would not be doing very much damage at all in a power build. In Tactics, we're going to take Empowered, Empowered Allies, and Failing Strength. Empowered Allies, as most people know, is a very powerful team DPS boost. And Failing Strength is one of the main reasons that people bring a Warrior to any group content in the first place. In Berserker, we're going to take Smash Brawler, Blood Reaction, and Bloody Roar. Blood Reaction is a very powerful trait that will add around 20% crit damage to the Warrior while in Berserk mode. Bloody Roar is an additional 10% damage boost, as well as a taunt, which does come in handy every now and then for clumping together trash mobs in fights that have them. Referring to slot skills now, we, in our healing slot, are going to take Blood Reckoning. Blood Reckoning is, in addition to being a very powerful heal skill in a fully buffed group, it will allow you to get an extra Arc Divider in per Berserk phase, which is going to be a nice DPS increase. For our utility skills, we are going to take Signet of Might, Banner of Strength, and Banner of Discipline. The big change here is Signet of Might over Signet of Fury. I have already described why I feel this change is better. If you are in the habit of activating your Signet of Fury, it will, of course, require some playstyle adjustment. Our elite skill is, as always, Headbutt. Headbutt is not only a very powerful CC, but it will allow us to maximize our Berserk mode uptime, which is the key to having acceptable DPS on your Warrior. It is very difficult to imagine playing a Warrior in any instance content any longer without Headbutt. Let's talk DPS rotations a little bit. As always, the key to a good Greatsword Warrior rotation is using your highest DPS skills as often as possible, and auto-attacking as little as possible. After a lot of DPS testing, a few interesting concepts were found by myself, as well as other people who have put in a lot of time on the Golem. Namely, it's better to use high-powered skills like Arc Divider or Rush, rather than to delay the skill with a dodge in order to maintain stick and move. Stick and move uptime is definitely a priority, but if you ever have to choose between dodging and having a higher DPS skill, go with the higher DPS skill and dodge afterwards. With that said, do not get me wrong. Your goal should always be to keep a rotation that uses both your best skills off cooldown and maintain stick and move 100%. Ideally, you want to dodge in lieu of an auto attack in your rotation when Arc Divider, 100 Blades, Whirlwind Attack, Rush, and Blade Trail are on cooldown. Depending on your Alacrity uptime, you may only get one dodge in before one of the skills comes off cooldown. In other cases, you may get 2 dodges. The other time to dodge is after a Whirlwind Attack when Rush is on cooldown. Dodging to replace an auto and dodging after a rushless Whirlwind Attack should give you very good stick and move uptime. It's also worth noting that Arc Divider is your highest DPS skill and should be used in preference over literally everything else. A typical Warrior opening to a fight is Double Dodge, Headbutt, Arc Divider, 100 Blades, Arc Divider, Whirlwind Attack, Blade Trail, Dodge, Rush, and then another Arc Divider, then Blood Reckoning, another Arc Divider, and 100 Blades. When Berserk mode ends, the best time to use Headbutt is in place of an auto attack. Often in a real raid situation, you will cleave enough ads not to need to utilize your Headbutt again to fill your adrenaline. I will show you a quick 1 million HP rotation to give you an example of what a Warrior rotation looks like in action. Note that in a longer fight, the DPS will come down a little bit versus what I show here, as Berserker downtime would become a larger percentage of the fight. However, I think that since power PS is at its best in fights that are more burst DPS oriented, this is not entirely a bad example. For the Condi Phalanx build, I recommend Viper's weapon and armor. The Trinkets are a bit of a mix and match with the goal of reaching exactly 100% condition duration on burns and bleeds with food. I recommend Viper's amulet, rings, and one Viper earring. The other earring should be Sinister. Ideally, a Sinister back piece would complete it, but lacking that, a Rampager or Rabid back piece will do. For runes, I recommend running Superior Rune of the Aristocracy. This gives the condition damage and might duration, both of which are reasons to run the build. Berserker runes would of course be a higher DPS option, but it would come at the cost of your might stacking capabilities, and it simply isn't viable to take a Condi warrior for pure DPS with no might stacking. For weapons, the build utilizes longbow as well as sword torch. Regardless of the weapon, the standard sigils are identical. Sigil of Strength and Sigil of Geomancy on each set, using Rare Veggie Pizza and Toxic Sharpening Stones as your consumables. This sigil setup is based around the concept of having enough group might from a few other sources to help contribute to your might stacking capabilities, whether that be Ellie's Overloading Fire, or a Hammer Guardian, or a Revenant. Some groups will require the Condi Phalanx build to have greater might stacking capabilities than this. If you are in a group like that, what you should do is swap out your Geomancy sigil for a sigil of Smoldering, and replace your Rare Veggie Pizza with Golden Fried Dumplings. This comes at a modest reduction of personal DPS, but is a very large increase to the might stacking capabilities of the build. For infusions, this is much easier than the alternative, a power build where you have to mix and match. We get to go 18 malign infusions, and you are set for your max level DPS. For Condi PS, we're going to swap out the strength line for arms, and in arms, we're going to take Signet Mastery, Deep Strikes, and Furious. Deep Strike is useful in conjunction with the 4 Great Justice in your bar to give you a bit of extra condition damage. And Furious is, of course, insanely powerful and an auto-include regardless of the situation. In this iteration of the guide, Signet Mastery will replace the previous usage of Berserker's Fury. What I found is that in any fight with adds or in long fights, the extra 300 precision that you get from the passive Signet of Might from Signet Mastery will be significantly more DPS than the passive Adrenaline gain from Berserker's Fury. Even in a condition damage build, the value of critting more often from the extra precision is quite high, and whatever you lose in Adrenaline from the passive Berserker's Fury, you will gain by additional crits that will give you more Furious procs and extra Adrenaline. So, regardless of what angle you look at it, it is a straight DPS increase to use Signet Mastery. Tactics will be the exact same as the power build. I do want to mention that Burning Arrows simply isn't worth dropping EA for, even if every member of your group is Condi. Burning Arrows only adds about 1,000 DPS to a warrior using it, And even in a full Condi group of 5 players, Empowered Allies is going to add more than 1,000 DPS. There's really, honestly, never a time to use Burning Arrows unless you're soloing content in the open world or in dungeons. In Berserker, the differences are going to be taking Heat of the Soul and King of Fires. Heat of the Soul is primarily there to be a DPS boost when we do swap to Sword Torch rotationally. And King of Fires is a big duration boost to our burns, as well as providing extra stacks of burning when we detonate our Fire Shield, which we look to do every time we get one. As far as slot skills go, it'll be the exact same as the power build, except we will swap out our Signet for 4 Great Justice. 4 Great Justice is required in order to keep the might up on your team, and using a Signet isn't going to be a very big DPS gain, so it's not losing very much to bring the 4 Great Justice. So really, everything should be more or less like that. If, for some reason, you do have another warrior in your subgroup, and you guys can share banners so you don't have to bring both, the next best utility skill to bring would be Shattering Blow, which adds a nice bit of DPS to the build. With that said, let's talk about DPS rotations. The bread and butter of this build is Scorched Earth. While you're in Berserk mode, your goal is to camp Longbow and cast Scorched Earth on your target off cooldown. Between Scorched Earth activations, use Fan of Fire and Pin Down. Arcing Arrow is definitely worth using off cooldown in order to keep the might uptime on your group with the procs of the Firefield Blast. In an actual raid, you won't always proc the Firefield Blast simply because there are other fields that are going to be down. But it does happen often enough, especially when you're spamming Firefields, to be worth using on cooldown without losing really any DPS. When Berserk mode ends, swap to Sword and cast Flames of War. You're then going to want to Savage Leap through your own Firefield to proc a Fire Aura, which, thanks to King of Fires, we can detonate with Blaze Breaker. This will be a nice DPS gain while we were on Sword. From that moment on, you're just going to want to auto-attack with Sword until your Adrenaline is full, and you'll be ready to go back into Berserk. Your Berserk should come off cooldown just before your weapon swap. Activate Berserk, use the Sword Primal Burst Flaming Flurry, and then swap to Longbow. If you need additional Adrenaline, cast Fan of Fire. Otherwise, cast Scorched Earth and resume your Longbow rotation. So next I'm going to show a short clip on the 1 million DPS Golem showing the build in action. Please be aware that most fights are going to be a bit longer than this, and the build will actually have slightly higher DPS than what it shows because of Signet Mastery eventually building up to 3 stacks. So let's talk usage. Let's assume that you have the gear to do both builds. A question many of you are going to have then is which bosses are better for power and which are better for Condi. Without going too deeply into the mechanics of each boss, although I will below in the comments if you wonder why, we'll go through and I'll tell you my preferences. Obviously at Veil Guardian you need at least one Condi to be optimal. However, it's not the worst thing in the world if both your warriors are Condi, but one Condi, one power seems to be the preferred mix by most groups. Power is again superior at Gorseval because it's a very bursty fight and he's a large hitbox, and Power Warrior does do a bit extra DPS against a large hitbox. Back to Sabbatha, Condi Warrior becomes better, for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is it's very easy to maintain your rotation, even while avoiding all the mechanics, as well as the fact that the last champion, Carde, does take additional damage from burning. In Wing 2, I find Power to be better at Slothosaur, but Condi is better at Trio and Matthias. In Wing 3, Power is better on the up team for Escort, with Condi being better on the down team for Escort, since it has a lot of Immobilize. For the Keep construct, I recommend that all the warriors in your group use Power build, because it's a very bursty fight, and you can do a perfect DPS rotation during the burn phase, and hopefully do a good bit of damage. And then lastly, at Zera, Condi is better by quite a bit, and I highly recommend using Condi Warrior at Zera in that regard. In dungeons, the vanilla dungeons, Ascalonian Catacombs all the way through Ara, Power is pretty much better in every instance. There might be a few corner case scenarios or particular bosses within a dungeon where Condi is better, but I would never use a Condi Warrior in vanilla dungeons if I didn't have to. On the flip side of that, in Fractals, I think there are definitely certain Fractals where Power is a little bit better, but none where Condi is bad, and many cases where Condi is superior by quite a bit. Therefore, I would recommend always using a Condi PS build in Fractals over Power if you have the option. So that's it, guys. This is a very long guide, much longer than any previous guide, but the level of specialization and exceptions and varieties of builds that are now in the game necessitated that. So I hope this was helpful to you guys. If you have any questions at all, please feel free to ask in the comments. And as always, I will do my very best to answer them. And I will see you next time.